On to our program today. We are approaching 100 days without a budget in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And the state's legislature and the governor seems to be at stalemate and certainly at odds as who owns the mandate from last November's election. Earlier in the year, we had a state treasurer who has resigned from office due to misuse of his office in seeking, demanding campaign contributions. He pleaded guilty to extortion. His sentencing is pending. We have the state attorney general who is also under investigation and facing multiple criminal counts. She's had her law license suspended. 3 openings at the state Supreme Court. 1 justice resigned due to misuse of public funds, another due to Porngate scandals. Fortunately, the last is due to reaching the maximum age of 70. It would appear that our state is in a bit of a mess. On the national level, talks of government shutdowns, budgets, nuclear deals with Iran, plus and minus, and troubles escalating in Syria with the Russians now putting boots on the ground and testing Turkey's borders. And of course, we all know that Turkey is a NATO member. All are in the news. Also, substantial changes in leadership in the House of Representatives with John Bonner's resignation taking effect in a few weeks, and the dominoes that that's going to set up for leadership. And we have, of course, the presidential election cycle in full swing, with outsiders from the traditional party base drawing significant appeal. Our guest speaker is our good friend and director of the Center of Politics and Public Affairs at Franklin Marshall College, Dr. G. Terry Madonna, to lend us some insight. Dr. Madonna will attempt to make some sense, to the trends we are seeing and help us better understand where our state and federal governments are heading in the near future. Rotarians and guests, I would ask you to warmly welcome Dr. Terry Madonna.
Oh my, you have all afternoon. None of us have gotten any of this right so far, so I feel like Admiral Stockdale, who was Ross Perot's running mate in 1992 during the first and only presidential debate, said, "Who am I and what am I doing here?" I sort of feel like that. But and also we have to, in a sense, ruin a great afternoon with what you've heard from the students. I spend my life around the young immortals, otherwise known as the millennials, and you can see why, in honesty, we may have our problems, but I think our country is in great, will be in great hands. At any rate, I don't know where to start. Let's start with the state, first of all, because I can use this as a segue to talk about national politics. It's easy right now to blame the folks in Harrisburg and the folks in Washington. Very easy to do. The difficulty is that we, as Americans, are equally, if not more, at fault. We are more divided as a country on virtually every major issue that confronts us than at any time in modern history. As a pollster, I can assure you when I ask questions of voters in this state, the cleavage between Republicans and Democrats is stark. It's tough to find some issues where there's harmony, where there's agreement. Most of what I ask people about, I find differences at the polls. By polls, I mean Republicans more conservative than they were, Democrats more liberal, with a declining and diminishing middle. Compromise has become a word that you're not allowed to use in polite company. And never the twain shall meet. And I don't have time to get into these issue differences, but there are a couple of aspects to this that are important. In the past, when politicians would meet, they might disagree. I might have one view and somebody else might have another view. But I disagreed with them, but I didn't think that if their policies prevailed, the country would not survive. We now have record levels of one party's members and leaders believing that if the other party's leaders get their way, the country will not survive. I mean, I want you to think about this. This is just not a case where we disagree. It's a case where if you win and I don't win, the country might well be doomed. Another aspect of this that I think is equally important has to do with the sense we get about who we are as Americans and what we expect. The range of possibilities is so great, they're hard to manage, they're hard to even get your hands around. And so as we look at what's going on in American politics today, we have these distinct poles, no middle, hugely unfavorable views, one party's members to another party's members, one party's leaders to another party's leaders. And I'll tell you something else that's different. In the old days, when politicians disagreed, they could get along. They actually socialized. They actually went to dinner, played golf, played tennis. There was a lot of camaraderie. You know the old story about Tip O'Neill, former Speaker of the House, and Ronald Reagan. That story was told that two couldn't agree on anything. Yet O'Neill would come over regularly to the White House. I won't tell you what they were drinking, but you know, it wasn't soft drink. And so they liked each other, and therefore they could find a way to work out a compromise. Now here are two big differences. Too many of our politicians today don't like each other. They literally don't like each other. And the second element is they don't trust each other. So if you don't like somebody and you don't trust somebody, it's very hard to get a deal. You add that to the ideological foundation that each party now rests its support base on. You add another layer onto this, legal, and I should say, sometimes legal gerrymandering, which packs more Republicans in districts, more conservative Republicans in Republican districts, more liberal Democrats in liberal districts, and you begin to see the problem. And so we're now down to a situation where we have seen a huge difference in the voters in the last couple of elections. When I used to go around the state and talk, and around the nation talking to groups, I would talk about ticket splitting. Oh, you want to win Pennsylvania? You probably have to do well in the Lehigh Valley, Lehigh County, Northampton, down in the Philly burbs, in Chester, Bucks, Montgomery, and Delaware counties. Why? Because that's where the voters who might be registered in one party will look at somebody in another party and split their ticket. We don't have so much of that here, and we don't have so much of that where I live in Lancaster. By the way, I told Mayor Bracey in a tweet that I would not restart the War of the Roses. She said I was still welcome. So I appreciate that. Anyway, what we're looking at here is a new, you almost don't know how to describe it. Before I could go and look at the suburbs of Washington, and I could tell you how Virginia was going to vote. I could go down to Florida and look at the I-4 corridor, you know, that runs along Orlando, Tampa. I could go up into the middle of Ohio. I could look at voters there and say, oh, you know, you win them, you're going to win. 90% of the voters of this country in the midterm election last year cast straight party votes. In other words, the polarization now means that instead of rethinking what we might do down ballot, where you might vote for a Republican for president but a Democrat for a member of Congress, we're losing, in a sense, that ticket splitting that predominated for the past 30 years that we would describe, that political scientists like myself would describe. So having said all of that, that leads us into a whole new territory when we talk about the big elections coming up. Now, I don't have time to get into great detail on the presidency. Let me just make a couple of observations. Number one, who could imagine, as you sit here today, that the leaders on the average of the last 5 polls, national leaders on the Republican Party, national, last 5, Donald Trump, Ben Carson, and Carly Fiorina. I want you to think about that. How would you think of a guy who made the statements that he made about John McCain? Now, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative. How could you say to a guy who spent 5 years on behalf of the service to our country being beaten in a prison is not a war hero? And what he said in his political correct age about Carly Fiorina's face. Could you imagine any conventional politician surviving that? So we have 3 people leading the Republican field, only one of whom ran for one office. As you well know, in 2010, Carly Fiorina for the for the U.S. Senate in California. Let's go to the Democratic Party. I want you to think about this for a minute. The candidate who now leads in New Hampshire and is virtually tied with Secretary Clinton in the first delegate selection state, Iowa, is not even a member of the very party in which he leads. You know, he leads one primary and almost leads another. He's not even a Democrat, and he's a self-described socialist. On what planet would you be if, even 4 years ago, you had somebody up here saying, how do you explain this? I've given up sort of trying, but you get the point. Some of that comes from the strong anti-establishment sense that the electorate has. Voters who, even though they're polarized, some voters tired that their side can't win. If I'm a Republican and I'm elected to stop what was going on during the Obama years, I don't want my members of Congress to compromise. I want them to shut down the government, that's all right, over my disagreement with Planned Parenthood. If I'm a Democrat, similarly, I don't want any of the Republican agenda. I don't believe the time is to curtail government, to cut taxes. And the same situation prevails now for Governor Wolf in Harrisburg. Harrisburg is a mirror image of what we see going on in Washington. Again, I don't have time, you know, who knows? I've been asked this, who's going to win the Republican nomination? To be candid, I don't have a clue. What do we know? Not one of the establishment candidates is in the top 3 in polling. By establishment, I mean people with a reasonable track record who've been in government for a while. And I joke, I tell the thing in my speech, you may not like this because it concerns you, but that's why professors have tenure. At any rate, I used to say the Republican Party often acted like the Rotary Club. The local Rotary Club went and picked its next president. Well, what does that mean? Well, they turn around and go, oh, it's your turn, you're next. Well, think about this. Mitt Romney ran, he was the party's nominee in 2012, right? Oh, he ran in 2008. Well, who was the nominee in 2008? Oh, John McCain. Oh, he ran in 2000. Who won in 2000, the Republican nomination? George Bush. Oh, only what? The son of a former president and a governor of Texas. You get any more establishment than that? You see the point? Who were, you know, and we could go back through Bob Dole, 1996, Republican candidate. Senate Republican leader, vice presidential candidate with Jerry Ford. Well, let's go back to 1988. Oh, vice president who? George Herbert Walker Bush, vice president to Ronald Reagan. You get it? It can go back. The Republican Party is not acting like itself right now. Largely because when I talk about the establishment wing of the party, it's feeling the heat from the anti-establishment voters in that party. And they're very strong and they're very virulent. And right at the moment, no one exactly knows what's going to happen. On the Democratic side, Hillary's problems with Benghazi, not very serious with Democratic voters. Even though the Clinton Foundation does a lot of good, I think we would all agree, we can't argue that it's not been a slush fund for the family, enriching them enormously. That's not even in doubt. Again, I'm not dismissing what they've done in terms of the Clinton Global for work around the world. It's been great stuff, but it's also enriched them. The email controversy is another matter. And so, waiting in the wings is Joe Biden. And Joe Biden lost his son, Beau, a few months ago, and my sense is that if he wasn't carrying that sorrow around, then he'd probably run. He's run 2 times before. They've been the most successful races in the world. Just on a personal note, we like Hillary and Joe to run because they both have Pennsylvania roots, and we can have fun talking about those Pennsylvania roots, and they both have deep connections to the state. Secretary Clinton is very popular in the Philly suburbs, and the Clinton, we had a former congressman, or a congresswoman, Marjorie Margolis, who represented a district in Montgomery County, for the most part 13, whose son married Chelsea Clinton. So we have that relationship. And Joe Biden was born in Scranton, he left when he was 10. Actually, Hillary Clinton's dad was born in Scranton. He played football for Penn State, for all you Penn State fans, before he moved to Chicago. So I won't, lots of stories, but I don't have time for this. So it's conceivable that Joe Biden will get into the race and make it fairly interesting. Most of us still think it's going to be tough to beat Secretary Clinton, but we've not been right about anything in this particular election. And then finally on this, before I'll get to some state stuff, is this. For the last 6 elections, Pennsylvania has gone through the Democratic candidate for the presidency of the United States. You got it, 2 Clinton, 2 Bill, Gore, Kerry, 2, and of course President Obama twice. But in 2012, when President Obama carried our state and won re-election, we were the 6th closest state in the country. Obama won our state by 5.2 percentage points. So most of us believe that Pennsylvania is likely to emerge again. For 30 years, if you won 2 of 3 states, you would probably get enough electoral votes to be chosen president. I want to point out something. There's only one number in presidential politics that matters. One number and one number alone. 270. That's the number of electors you need to win the presidency. And for 30 years, if you won 2 of 3 states, Florida, Ohio, or Pennsylvania, it pushed you over the top and you got to the magic 270. The other point I want to make is, if you live in 40 states, you don't matter. You don't matter. If you live in New York, or Massachusetts, or Vermont, or New Jersey, or Delaware, or Illinois, or California, you don't matter. Those states, since before the fall of the Roman Empire, have been voting Democratic. Well, back 6, 7, 8 elections. If you live in Texas or Louisiana, you see where I'm heading with this, and Montana, you don't matter. So the elections for the presidency of the United States come down to 10 states. And whether we're one of them, and I think we will be one, probably matters this time, which means we're likely to see the presidential candidates, and they're likely to spend a lot of money on television advertising, which will make WGAL happy, and therefore I can keep my Sunday morning tea down. I'm kidding, just joking. So the long and the short of it is that virtually all of the campaigning and the dollars, once the nomination is decided, will be spent in 10 states. Well, lastly, let me just say something about Harrisburg, and it's almost defiant. How about if I tell you that we had an election last fall, and the Republicans rightly can argue they won, and Governor Wolf can rightly argue he won. Oh, wait a minute. How can both be right? Well, let's think about this for a minute. Let's talk about the Republicans. As a result of last year's election, the Republicans got 120 members elected to the House. Got 120 out of 203. That's the largest majority any party has had in our state legislature in the House since Dwight David Eisenhower was President of the United States. They were elected, not just Republicans, but Democrats, in 3/4 of the cases with 60% of the vote or more. Following this little argument, 60% of the vote or more. Oh, 110 incumbent House members, in both parties, didn't have an opponent in the general election. So I'm in a district, I win by 63% of the vote, and I go and say, I'm going to lower your taxes, we're not going to have budget busters, we're not going to have a shale tax, we're not going to have a personal income tax, we're going to have a small increase in the state budget. I get 63% of the vote, my party wins a record-setting 120 seats. Why can't I say I won? Now let's talk about something else. A guy named Tom Wolf, and I know you over here in New York, you don't know him. A guy named Tom Wolf does something that no other out party could do, trying to defeat an incumbent governor, since we permitted re-permitted, I should say, that to occur in 1970. Milton Shapp was the first governor since 1873 who would seek re-election. So Shapp wins twice, Thornburg wins twice, Casey wins twice, Ridge wins twice, Rendell wins twice. I had to impress you that I could name all those governors without notes in front of me, which I successfully did. And Tom Corbett loses. He not only loses re-election, but he loses by 10 points. And so Governor Wolf gets elected, and he basically ran on a couple of big themes. One theme was, if I'm elected, we're going to increase funding for education. It was, for the first time in the history of the state, modern history, education funding was the single most important issue in the vote choice of Pennsylvanians when they cast the vote. Additionally, he said that if elected, I'm going to do a severance tax. It was a 5% tax that he talked about during the campaign. That was very popular with the voters. So let's think about this. You get a governor who says, we're going to increase education spending, and the voters want that. We're going to increase the shale, we're going to have a shale tax for the first time. Tax on the cubic feet extracted, blah, blah, blah. And he wins by 10 points doing something nobody else had ever done in modern history. Why can't he say he won? So now when you're in Harrisburg and you're listening to this discussion, it's like you're having a discussion between somebody sitting on Mars and somebody sitting on Venus, and the two can't get anywhere together. Each side believing that they're right, and they have constituencies that they just were elected from who wanted to do the things they said they would do during the course of the campaign. So you can't even get angry at them for not doing what they said they would do. They're doing exactly what they said they would do. And because increasingly there's no middle, see where I'm headed? There's no way to compromise. Now they're having I don't know what happened, they're having a vote today on the House floor on Governor Wolf's third iteration of the budget, which will probably be voted down. And if that's the case, we're back to square one, and where it all heads, no one knows. What I've tried to do here is to objectively say, to get into the head, why are the Republicans doing what they're doing, and why are the Democrats doing what they're doing? And when you think about it that way, it's easy to understand. I don't like it, and I'm not asking you to like it. I'm merely explaining why it is the way it is. No middle, ideological polarization, and new kinds of members to the legislature. Oh, I don't have to tell you that. You have a certain senator who's a different kind of senator. That's all I'm going to say. I don't want some commercial aimed at me. Guess what? I don't care. But you get the point, right? I think you get the point. And so when you have 60% of the House that's new, since the single dumbest thing done by a legislature in the free world, the infamous pay hike in 2005, and then you have the Tea Party election in 2010, and then you have another Republican wave in 2014, and you got all these new people who don't want to make it a career, who aren't necessarily interested in bringing something back home, who just want to curtail the size of government, reduce spending, you get to cut regulations, no new taxes. You get a setting in which it's not easy to work out a compromise because each side has to, in a sense, betray the very arguments that they were elected on. I mean, that's not hard to understand. And I think both sides, and here's what's going on, both sides have moved towards the other, and every time they move towards the other with a New Deal, the other side doesn't even recognize they've made a compromise offer. They just go to the things the other side hasn't done. So if Wolf goes, well, let's privatize the management of the liquor control operation, let's privatize it. Let's privatize it. They don't, the management, it stays the same. The other side doesn't even comment. Well, if they could assure us that it would lead to complete privatization, okay, you get the point? And so, and the same for the pension plan. Pennsylvania's public pension systems, and there are two big ones, they're municipal, but they're two big ones, municipal ones are important too, are heading to 60 billion in debt. Got this? 60 billion. In 3 years, it's going to chew up $3 to $4 billion out of the state budget just to pay for it. You see, many of you folks are in business, you know what that means. It takes away operating money. And so Wolf says, well, the Republicans want a 401k style plan for all new employees. They wanted some other things. Wolf said, well, I'll start it at 75 grand. I'll start it at 75 grand. First 75, you stay in a defined benefit program, above 75, oh, okay. But he still wants $3 billion in bonds to help deal with the debt. So he makes that offer, and it's like the Republicans say, well, we don't know. You know, he went halfway there, and they want a complete 401k style plan for all new employees. And the Republicans have made some offers. They offered Wolf $400 million in school subsidy money. Not totally, not everything that Wolf wants, which pushes about $1 billion. And so every time somebody makes an offer, they come out of the meeting and say, there's no progress. And when you get into that situation, you literally don't know how it's likely to end. And my big problem with it right now is there doesn't seem to be any escape route that any party can use in order to get where they need to get, which is a budget that works. The Republicans say no income tax. Wolf dropped the sales tax proposal that he had, if you're familiar with that. He still wants the severance tax. But at the moment, and you know, I've been through a lot of these and written a lot about a lot of these. One day they'll come out and they'll surprise us all and it'll be done. Right? But until then, I reiterate my point about how we got where we are, and in part we're to blame, but it's also the fact that the politics now are so bitter and divisive that it's not likely to reach a compromise anytime soon. Before I go, I'm under court order to announce that the York Bar is having a forum for the judicial candidates. Who got the plug in on the commissioners? You did? No. Yeah, you did. Well, yeah, you did. So the York Bar is having a forum for the election to the Court of Common Pleas on October 20th at York College. I guess, is everybody invited to that? They are? So they just show up and they get in? All right. You can give them a drink or two, maybe? Sorry. Yeah, we have to keep the proper decorum, right, because we got potential judges there. All right, well, why don't I stop there? I noticed it was at the time, at the hour, and I'll try to answer any question. Or I'll find my way across the river, not having started, never mind. Yes, sir.
Harry, how about the race for Speaker of the House here? That's kind of interesting.
You mean Boehner and all of that? Yeah, the question has to do with the Speaker of the House, and you know, a representative named McCarthy from California does he ride a motorcycle? Is Kevin McCarthy, who's been in about 10 years, less than 10 years, looks like, quote, the establishment choice to replace Boehner. And quite frankly, the problem with that is that if you look at his total record, he's actually not as conservative as Boehner, and we're likely to have a fight. There's a House member from Florida, I love the guy's name. His name is Daniel Webster. Now, how can you not, right? And did you mention John Quincy Adams? Who did? I haven't heard that in forever. Good God. Nobody quotes John Quincy Adams anymore. I like that. At any rate, it looks like there's going to be a struggle between the so-called Tea Party wing in the Republican caucus, and some of them part of what's known as the Freedom Caucus. The Freedom Caucus is about 2 to 3 dozen supporters in the House, Republicans, and they've been able to prevent any kind of compromise on things like the debt limit, some of the stuff that was mentioned here earlier that I don't have time to get into, that's likely to be required, raise the debt ceiling, do something about a permanent budget. The president has said he signed his last, in a sense, stopgap continuing resolution. And so I think there could be a very interesting struggle that goes on between the Tea Party types and the establishment Republicans in the House. And then there's another candidate in the race as well. All right, anybody else? Yes, sir.
What's the story with the Attorney General?
Oh, I don't have 2 days. The question concerns Kathleen King. I honestly don't have enough time. Here's the issue. The issue is whether she lied to a grand jury and then covered it up. That's the issue. She says there was a cabal of the old boys in the Attorney General's office who were out to get her. and they set her up in a particular case involving charges that she didn't file against 4 lawmakers and a Philly traffic judge. All 5 were African Americans. She said there was racial targeting in it, she wouldn't prosecute them. She said they set her up by leaking the fact that she wouldn't charge them to the Philadelphia Inquirer. Subsequent to the case was turned over to Seth Williams, the African American Democratic district attorney of Philly, and he successfully now has prosecuted 4 of them. So then we get into her testimony before a statewide grand jury and whether she lied and covered up what she did in all of this. And they now have, by my last count, and I could be wrong about this, 13 charges, 2 felonies and the rest misdemeanors. The 2 charges are perjury. And the problem is that there were 7 people who testified in the grand jury that she lied. One of them a very close confidant that she hired. And lawyers know that grand juries, there's an old saying that a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich. But I think she's in a world of trouble. She's had her license temporarily suspended by the Supreme Court, and she's got multiple other issues. I have a whole 45 minutes on it, which the president says sit down. Thank you.